Welcome to the Smarter Science of Slim, the scientifically proven program where you eat more and exercise less to burn fat and boost health.
Eat smarter, exercise smarter, live better. I am so ready for that.
Hey everybody, Jonathan Bailor back with another bonus Smarter Science of Slim show. As you know, the Calorie Myth book is right on the horizon, or potentially already out, depending on when we air this show. And all this talk of calories, maybe one of the best parts of it was my getting introduced to an amazing nutritional biochemistry and physiology researcher by the name of Bill Lagakos. And he has written a book called The Poor Misunderstood Calorie. And he has a blog called caloriesproper.com. And the thing that I love about Bill is he perfectly reflects our little catchphrase of biology isn't a matter of opinion. Bill just comes out and says, look, here is the actual research about obesity, inflammation, insulin. Here's what calories actually are. Here's what the research actually shows. Like, not dogma, not sound bites, nothing about opinions, just straight science. And I love that. And I love that he's here chatting with us today. Bill Lagakos, PhD, welcome to the show, brother.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. Bill, can you tell us real quick, before we dig into the science, a little bit of your story and what got you so interested in calories and helping to dispel some of these calorie myths?
Well, I started to sort of jumble down this rabbit hole because I think when you're talking to the common people who don't really understand what these calories are and they want to learn about them, you get this problem where you're talking about there's calories in food, and then you're talking about, oh, well, you got to go exercise to burn calories. And how are those two things having the same name? How are they related? When one of them's, a food that's in your refrigerator, and one of them's, you in the gym lifting weights. And so those two concepts are so fundamentally different. That's why I started to write the book, The Poor Misunderstood Calorie. It was just really just about that word, how it's used, how it's misused, how it's, used to support what's been treating obesity for, or what have they been trying to use to treat obesity for since all of time, which is the calories in, calories out model. And I don't think that works very well in practice because it just doesn't take into account any of the other more important factors like nutrient partitioning. What happens to the food after you eat it? Does it get stored in the adipose tissue or is it burnt by muscle? And that's all of those things are regulated by, physical activity, by your hormones. I think your hormones are probably one of the most important things in determining your body composition and quality of life. However, hormonal biology is just not captured in that calories in, calories out equation.
Bill, that is such a great encapsulation. And I appreciate it because you get the science, and it's very easy to kind of go off the deep end and really get into the science, which we're going to do. But you also have a way to communicate this stuff in a very engaging fashion, which I'm a fan of. And the point you made about how calories are used as this least common denominator, that equivalence class, all types of physical movements, and anything that can provide energy to your body glosses over tell me if this is an overstatement, but it glosses over so much that it borders on almost being more harmful than it is helpful to just think about calories.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think I agree with that totally. I'm not going to argue that the calories in, calories out equation is wrong. It's right. If somebody loses weight, then they were in an energy deficit. However, it's a useless equation because, the obese patient comes to the doctor says, you've got to expend more calories than you're ingesting. So the patient goes home and what's he going to do with that advice? He or she is going to try and eat less food and try and exercise more. And there's 99,000 ways where that could not work. And, for example, they could just cut out some of the healthy food out of their diet. They're eating less. And they could, try walking or parking further from, their workplace or whatever and walking a little bit further. And so they're exercising more, but then energy balance could drop down a couple hundred calories per day, and they're no longer in an energy deficit, and they're not going to lose weight. I think that happens all too commonly when people focus on the number game, the calories, and not food quality, what you're eating, which macronutrients, and a million other factors.
Bill, to highlight and to really make sure it hits home with the listeners, because it's such an important distinction, you said, and I agree with, and anyone who disagrees with has no idea what they're talking about, that it's not that calories don't exist or that the calories in, calories out energy balance doesn't exist. It absolutely exists. It's just, it's as useful as saying to a coach of an athletic team, hey, coach of the athletic team, why did you lose the game? And he says, well, the other team scored more points than we did. And then you said, well, what are you going to do about that? And the coach says, well, in the future, we're going to try to score more points than our opponents. Like that's... Oh.
Yeah, absolutely.
But how or why, right?
Right. That coach should be fired because, they're not going to win any games.
Exactly. And you talked about the things that matter more and that drive energy. And again, it's not that energy balance doesn't exist. It's just that thinking that we should consciously regulate calories in and calories out to balance energy seems to not make any sense once you understand the biology.
I agree with that totally. I mean, in even another way that it could be wrong is you could be in energy balance, eating just as much as you're expending. But, if you're eating poor quality foods or junk foods, it could result in something, catastrophic, like you could lose 3 pounds of skeletal muscle and gain 3 pounds of visceral fat. And in that situation, you're still in energy balance. Calories in did equal calories out. However, the person's quality of life is going to be markedly deteriorated. Now they're predisposed to metabolic disease, to obesity, to inflammation. And hey, that's within the boundaries of calories in, calories out. And it's not mentioned by that equation.
That's such this energy partitioning and the what actually happens in the body in terms of the body not just being a passive vessel. That's what you cover a lot in your work too, is you show that this model of calories in, calories out as traditionally taught assumes that the body just sits back, and if you cut 500 calories, then you're going to burn 500 calories of body fat, which is like kindergarten logic. Like that doesn't, that's not at all true, correct?
Yes, I agree with that 100%. I think that the way the hormones work in the body, they're going to be controlling a lot of things. They can be manipulated by good dietary choices, but they're going to be pretty much the end determinant as to, nutrient partitioning is one of those things I harp on a lot. I think you can be in energy balance and still, quote unquote, well, I shouldn't say lose weight, but improve your body composition, which I think is a far more important outcome than just losing weight per se. And that's something that has to do with hormones. And that's not really, calories. Hormones are going to regulate what your body does with the nutrients, and they're also going to impact appetite, satiety, hunger, and all of these things are sort of very important. And that's where we need to be focusing on is treatments that bear in mind what happens inside the body, the hormones, the nutrient partitioning, and don't worry about the calories. Once you get the hormones right, the person's not going to want to be eating excessive calories. I mean, once you get the right diet and the hormones get corrected, that's going to fix a lot of the problems.
Bill, in your book, The Poor Misunderstood Calorie, you highlight some specific examples where individuals could be in a state of quote unquote energy balance, gain fat, which again should be quote unquote impossible, or gain muscle, or be in a state of energy balance and lose fat and lose muscle, or even most shockingly, you provide a study, I believe, where in animal models, these animals were in a state of negative energy balance, but actually gained body fat.
That's one of my favorite rodent studies ever. They were feeding the mice 5% less than they were supposed to be getting, 5% less than the other group. And their body weight didn't change very much. And that sort of baffled the researchers. So they actually did the entire study twice to confirm. And once they did the comprehensive body composition analysis, they said they couldn't come to the conclusion that the mice got fatter. But I, wrote about this on my blog and in the book, and I said they got fattier because body composition results actually showed that the adipose tissue did increase, at the expense of muscle, organ tissues. Everything else went down just a little bit. They were in negative energy balance, but it didn't work. And I think that happened because in that sort of study, when they want to reduce the food intake of a mouse, they give the mouse the food all at once. The mouse, it's sort of a stressful regimen. So I think that happened because of the stress, which is another thing I focus on in the book, is all the negative impacts of having too much stress. In this case, it made the mice have this nutrient anti-partitioning, where they got increased adipose tissue at the expense of their muscle tissue. I mean, they were eating less. I don't think physical activity was changed very much in that study, but it doesn't really matter too much.
And Bill, it's the thing that I liked most about reading your book was, one, you get straight into the science. So there's no you lose 5 pounds in 5 days. It's not like this gimmicky thing. It's just like, hey, here's what the science says. Right. And it explains, it starts to hint at big holes that I think once people can wrap their head around them, they can free themselves from these calorie myths, which are otherwise so hard to escape from because it's quote unquote intuitive. Like, it's intuitive that if you eat less, eating less is a good way to burn fat. It's also intuitive that the world is flat, right? But it's not, right? So here's just one thing I'd love to get your expert take on, because you study this professionally. You're a professional researcher. This is what you do. So recently, we've been having discussions on other shows of this concept of energy balance, blah, 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 blah. So let's say you have a person. Let's call this person Samantha. Samantha has 100 excess pounds of fat on her body. Mm-hmm. Why would Samantha ever get hungry for calories? Considering that she has, quote unquote, 350,000 of them in surplus. She's already in a state of caloric surplus even without eating anything. So why does she get hungry?
I'm going to say straight up that's because hormonal biology. That adipose tissue is going to be holding on to that energy tightly because of the hormones. And, there's going to be a failure of the satiety mechanisms in the brain that also comes in part from the adipose tissue. We've got the two major players here. The diet she's eating, I'm imagining, isn't going to be, a healthy diet full of whole foods. I think she's going to have probably too much insulin signaling, and that causes adipose tissue to grow, to accumulate fat mass. There's this hormone, this enzyme in the adipose tissue. It's called hormone-sensitive lipase. That's pretty much what controls, fat uptake, or actually fat release from the adipose tissue. It got its name because it is the most hormone-sensitive lipase in the body, the most hormone-sensitive enzyme. And the hormone that we're talking about in this case is insulin. Once you get even the smallest amount of insulin, that enzyme shuts down and you're no longer releasing energy from the fat tissue. And that's sort of, that's a big player. I think that's a huge component to what's contributing to Samantha's obesity. And another mechanism is the adipose tissue is secreting leptin that's supposed to be causing satiety in the brain, but it's not, because she's also leptin resistant, which also seems to be an indicator of a poor diet quality. All of these things have to do with the hormones regulating the energy balance. And, poor Samantha, tell her to give me a call.
Bill, I so appreciate that you just said poor Samantha, because this situation we see, there are hundreds of millions of Samanthas around the world now, hundreds of millions. And here, this is what breaks my heart, Bill. And we've got two scientists on the phone here, and I want to just get a little bit more right brain, a little bit more heart rather than head here for a second, because according to the popular literature, Samantha is just weak, and that she should just she's just overeating. And let's be very clear, Bill. There's probably 1% of the population, just like there's 1% of the well, I don't know what the percentage is, that like takes crack. Like if you take crack, bad things are going to happen. You probably shouldn't take crack. But like,
I think we can agree on that.
the Samanthas of the world, 99+% of them eat when they're hungry and stop when they're full. And to tell them, why can't you just be hungry for the rest of your life?
Right. That's not a cure.
Absurd.
Yeah, I don't like any diet that results in the patient being hungry or having to like excessively restrict their diet, which means they're hungry. That's not a cure. That's completely unsustainable. You've got to find a diet that works where they don't need to have a notebook with them counting calories, because that's socially awkward. It will fail.
Well, and you've just got to ask why. Like there are some key why questions. I also use. I'm curious as to your, if you can give a little bit of science on this situation here, Bill. So walk into any school cafeteria. It's not like 30% of the students are eating salads and drinking, sparkling water, and 70% of the students are eating pizza and French fries and drinking Coke. All of the students are eating pizza and French fries and Coke, and some of the students are pre-diabetic and overweight, and some of the students aren't. So we talk about, oh my God, 70% of the population is overweight. I think the more interesting question is, why isn't 100% of the population overweight?
Sure. I mean, I do think there are sort of distinct, physiologies going on. There are some people that are resistant to obesity, and that's the kind of person that will have that pizza and Coke and all of a sudden be bouncing around the room. Their body will warm up, which indicates increased energy expenditure from a thermic effect of feeding. They'll have more motivation to go outside and do things. That's like the lean phenotype. I think that's unfortunately a little bit rare, but that's also going to be dictated to, they got lucky with a good hormonal biology, could be in the DNA. And on the other hand, you have the obesity phenotype, this person who is going to tend to, secrete a lot of insulin in response to their food, and, the same amount of food that the lean person is, but the increased insulin is going to result in the increased fat storage. This person's not going to have the energy to go outside and play. They're not going to warm up that much after meals. They might even just get more hungry. And that's an unfortunate scenario, and I think that's probably the major driver of the obesity epidemic.
Sounds like, Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but to summarize what you just said, there is a percentage of the population who respond to more in with more out, and then there's a larger percentage of the population that responds to more in with more stored fat.
Yes, I do believe that is true. I think there are people that are going to be, there's insulin resistance plays a big part in this too, and it also plays a part in how you're going to respond to dietary therapy. There are some people, there's this class of obesity called the metabolically healthy obesity. So they're actually insulin sensitive, and they seem to do well on any kind of diet. You give them a good meal plan, you can reduce the fat a little bit, you can reduce the carbohydrate a little bit, and they respond well. And unfortunately, that's also the minority of the obese population. When you have the insulin-resistant obese people, sort of metabolically unhealthy, they have to watch their diet. They need to sort of be very mindful of the carbohydrate quantity. They need to cut the carbs, basically, is what I'm saying, for the majority of the obese population, and that has to do with the fact that they're insulin resistant.
We talk about carbohydrates, we talk about energy balance, we talk about what the body can do in response to an increased food intake. Case studies or concrete examples that everyone can associate with, I think, are very helpful. And I can't think of maybe a better example, Bill, and I'd love to, again, get the scientific explanation here of bodybuilders. So a bodybuilder will consume, as a former attempted amateur bodybuilder myself, will consume 4,000 to 6,000 calories per day while not doing, like, not Michael Phelps style, not submerging themselves in cold water for 7 hours a day, doing a reasonable amount of physical activity, consuming an abundance of calories, and maintain For men, single-digit body fat percentages, and for females, very low in the teens body fat percentages.
Sure.
How can a body respond to so many calories with such leanness?
Well, there's a couple things going on there. One, I'm pretty sure that person is going to be extremely conscious of the foods they're eating, the diet quality. This person's not eating snack packs. They're not eating cookies and ice cream. They're probably eating a high percentage of protein, high quality fats, and that's a very, very important mediator here. Also, the type of exercise you're doing. If you're doing the resistance exercise, you're stimulating muscle growth. That's important because, one, just the fact that you're increasing protein synthesis and protein turnover, that's energy expensive. That's going to burn off a lot of those excess calories that they're eating. And also, when you have more muscle mass and that more functional strength, you're going to be expending more energy on all day long because you're going to have more, basically the energy to live. You're going to be okay walking somewhere because you don't get so tired. And another thing is the act of exercising itself is a very potent nutrient partitioning agent. That's kind of weird to phrase it like that, but when you exercise, all the blood flow goes to the muscles, to the contracting muscles. And also, the muscles will start to take up all the nutrients. So if you have a big meal and then go exercise, the blood flow is going to drive those nutrients into the muscle tissue away from adipose. So you get this profound nutrient partitioning effect that, this is sort of the exact opposite scenario as to somebody who sort of has a big carbohydrate-rich meal and takes a nap. That's going to be basically the opposite bodybuilder effect. It's going to be putting all of the excess fat will be stored in the adipose tissue. So I think it's a combination of the exercise and the actual specific diet that they're eating.
Bill, you touch on, you touched on, and we've used the phrase nutrient partitioning many, many times already in this conversation. So I want to take a step back and define that for folks real quickly, and then also just encourage people again to check out your book, The Poor Misunderstood Calorie, as well as your website, Calories Proper, because a lot of the concepts we've touched on here, we haven't and won't have the time to dig into the specific studies in science. And what's so great about what you're hearing here is it's not my opinion, it's not Bill's opinion. We can provide, and Bill has done so, definitive, clinical. These aren't observational studies. These are they're taking muscle biopsies and getting definitive data. Talk about nutrient partitioning for a second here. And just to foreshadow what nutrient partitioning is, think about the following, listeners. Let's say you do eat a lot. Why does that, for many of us, cause us to store more fat rather than to make our hair grow faster or our nails grow longer? Because technically, those take up energy too. So why doesn't overeating, like it may make your fat stores grow, why doesn't it make your hair grow faster and your nails grow longer?
Well, they aren't insulin-sensitive tissues. Well, they might be. I don't know. They're not storage tissues. They're not storage. So when I talk about nutrient partitioning, basically, to summarize it, I'm looking at two tissues. I'm looking at adipose, even though adipose can be subdivided into, torso, extremities, visceral, subcutaneous. I'm just going to lump it all together now and say adipose tissue is one of those tissues and skeletal muscle is the other one. When we talk about nutrient partitioning, you can be in energy surplus, in energy deficit, in energy balance. We're talking about the nutrients being directed away from the adipose tissue and toward muscle. And that's sort of affected by both the hormone and the physical activity. Nutrient anti-partitioning, the opposite would be, you're eating, I associate this more with junk food and maybe sedentary behaviors, is when instead of getting the protein synthesis, the skeletal muscle anabolic response from the meal, the excess, or not even the excess nutrients, you could be, as the mouse study we discussed earlier, you could be in an energy deficit, but the energy you're eating still ends up getting shunted into the adipose tissue instead of muscle. So that's my sort of perspective on nutrient partitioning.
From a very high level, Bill, would it be fair to define nutrient partitioning as what the body decides to use calories for?
Absolutely. Sure.
Brilliant. So we shouldn't, so for example, I'm losing my hair. I shouldn't sort of fear that the 13 fewer calories I'm going to burn per day because I'm losing hair and calories are no longer being spent helping my hair grow, that over time, those 13 fewer calories won't make me weigh 1,000 pounds, as they technically should if calorie math, the way presented, was accurate.
Right. I would say your best bet would be to embrace the loss of hair and be happy about it so that you're not stressed out. Because if you get stressed about it, then that's going to promote the nutrient anti-partitioning.
Well, Bill, this is fabulous. And listeners, we've only touched on the surface here. And again, the reason I wanted to have Bill on the show, and the reason I'm wholeheartedly encouraging that you check out his work, which again is the book, The Poor Misunderstood Calorie, as well as the website Calories Proper, is because there's no ideology. There's no bias. This is science. And when you actually look at the science, it is so liberating because it shows, one, why what we've been told hasn't worked, and two, what does work. And it's really not ambiguous once you understand the science, nor is it hunger-inducing, nor is it time-consuming. Am I painting too idealized of a picture, Bill, or is that pretty fair?
No. I mean, I agree with that totally. A long time ago, I sort of stopped trying to dig into the history of why people think the way they do now. And I just started to devote that energy to looking at the clinical trials, looking at the intervention studies to see how do things work in real life? How do things work in the studies? And it becomes very clear that, the way people respond to food and behaviors and the hormones are sort of what's going to be the answer at the end of the day, not calories. If we go back to that example of Samantha, I used to joke about somebody who has a 2,000 calorie energy expenditure going on a diet where they eat 19 of those 100 calorie snack packs per day. I actually read in the news the other day, there was someone who was doing that, and I just felt horrible because that's not going to work. I mean, the body will so easily compensate for that 100 calorie deficit by reducing energy expenditure by 150 calories, so you're no longer in a deficit. And furthermore, any of that surplus is probably going to get put into the adipose tissue because, you're hungry and you're stressed out.
And not to mention that poor individual is on a bullet train to diabetes and cancer and heart disease because, you know what? Calories aren't what give you diabetes, heart disease, and cancer in the first place. They're units of energy. And so if you're concerned with not dying of avoidable diseases, those are not diseases of excess calories. Those are diseases of other things besides calories.
Right. Poor nutrient quality, poor diet choices. That's the more important thing.
Bill, this is just super helpful, and we could certainly talk for hours and hours and hours, and we will definitely be chatting more in the future. But what's next for you, and what can the readers hope to see coming from caloriesproper.com?
I'm still blogging. I'm very active on there. What's next for me is I am working on another book. It's different, but I would like to think it's sort of like the volume 2. The unofficial title of my first book is The Poor Misunderstood Calorie, volume 1. I'm working on a follow-up to that where I'm including a lot more things. I mean, for a guy who despises the discussion of calories and the numbers, I sure do talk about them a lot. But I'm talking about more things like, getting a good night's rest. I mean, that can royally screw up body composition and cause nutrient partitioning to work against you. Vitamin D metabolism, playing outside in the sun, a lot of things that are sort of more important than the number of calories you're eating. That's going to be a big focus of the next book.
Brilliant. Well, Bill Lagakos, PhD, thank you so much for helping to dispel these devastating calorie myths and for sharing with us a much smarter science. And I hope I can chat again with you soon.
Sure. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, listeners, again, our wonderful guest today was Bill Lagakos, PhD. He is the author of the book, The Poor Misunderstood Calorie, which I would highly recommend, as well as the proprietor of the website, caloriesproper.com. Give him some love, free yourself from the calorie myths, and remember, this week and every week after, eat smarter, exercise smarter, and live better. Chat with you soon.
Wait, don't stop listening yet.
You can get fabulous free SANE recipes over at carriebrown.com.
And don't forget your 100% free eating and exercise quick start program, as well as free, fun, daily tips delivered right into your inbox at bailorgroup.com. That's BAILOR group.com.